It's time for the District 4 Report, presented to you by Professor Diggs himself, only on PilePointBearcats.com. Class begins now.
Thank you to our friends in the studio in Pilot Point for bringing me in this evening. I am Professor Diggs. Thank you for tuning in to the District 4 3A Report. And we have a lot more clarity than we did last week. Again, thank you to Nolan Ruth for coming on and breaking down the Paradise and Peaster game, and he was pretty much right on. We had an instant classic, and we'll talk about that. Of course, we'll talk about what happened. We're going to talk about what's happening this week. We'll even kind of look ahead to what's happening in 2 weeks, and then we'll look at the big picture of the playoffs. So, of course, we like to look at what happened last week, what I thought with the point spreads. And last week, if you liked blowouts, you were in good company because you had a blowout central. In fact, I thought we were going to have a lot more competitive nature in 2 of the 4 games than actually happened. We had Whitesboro and Bowie. I had Whitesboro winning by 15. They ended up winning by 57, and I think making a pretty big statement. I'll have to call back Nolan because I know Nolan thought that Whitesboro would potentially not make the playoffs, and I guess this week we'll have some more clarity into that. I still think Whitesboro is probably your third place team in this district, winning 64-7 last week and eclipsing my pick by a good 42 points. Boyd versus Brock, I had Brock by 49, and unfortunately for Brock, they only won by 48, and we'll talk about why that's significant here in a little bit. That's a little tongue-in-cheek, so obviously a 48 or 49-point win is quite significant. Then we had Paradise and Peaster. I thought this was going to be a one-score game, and it ended up being a one-score game. Took double overtime to decide that game as Paradise and Peaster winning 41-38. And there is some confusion because Peaster on their Twitter did post that this is their first playoff. They clinched the playoff, but I don't have them clinching the playoffs. I don't know if they've corrected that quite yet, and we'll talk about the scenario in which they may not clinch the playoffs coming up. But congratulations to Peaster, obviously making a big step because Paradise is a real team. Carter Staten has been playing well all year and had a great night, just came up a little bit too short in the overtime period. And then Pilot Point versus Ponder, I thought Pilot Point would win comfortably. I had them winning by 28. They ended up winning by 51. So we had 3-point spreads over 48 last week. In fact, if you would have guessed that Brock had the third best point spread of the 4 winners in this district, probably could have won some money at one of the Choctaw casinos, although you should never bet on high school outside of a good dinner in Pilot Point right there on the strip. But some big wins and a lot of clarity this week. So let's kind of break down what happened in the games. Let's start at Whitesboro. Whitesboro beating Bowie 64-7, and this game was pretty much academic, being 41-0 at halftime, and then just kind of running through the paces to end the game. Let's talk about this sophomore, Clay Hermes. We're going to get to hear his name the next couple of years, depending on what realignment brings us. He accounted for 7 touchdowns in this game, 13 for 18 for 230 yards, and he threw for 5 touchdowns. He also ran for 2 touchdowns, 11 carries on 50 yards for the 2 scores. So 7 touchdowns for the sophomore. Depending on when his birthday is, can't even legally drive yet, and is putting up 7 touchdowns in a district quite like this. So quite the night for Whitesboro, as I think they made a little bit of a statement getting ready for the next couple of weeks where they take on Peaster and Paradise to finish up. One of the more interesting endings to a schedule, the way the schedule is breaking out. Obviously, the Peaster-Paradise game was the game of the night. A back-and-forth affair. And really, even though Peaster won and ended up winning the game, they were always ahead, except for one moment in the game where they were trailing 21-20. But they were pretty much ahead the whole game, including the final. Paradise scored first in the second overtime, kicking a field goal. Peaster ended up winning with that field goal. Now, one thing I don't understand, and I'll have to do a little bit of research. Y'all can trust me to do the research project on this, is if they tried kicking the extra point afterward, or maybe even going for two, which is what I think they would need to do in the second overtime, because that could end up being an important 2 points, as we're going to talk about later on. Again, no word if they did that or did not do that, but a lot of tiebreakers do allow for them to go for the 2 point conversion even after they win because of tiebreaker scenarios, and that very well could come into play. Again, just a huge night for Carter Staten, leading his Paradise Panthers, but also another big night for Gunnar McElroy. And really, it wasn't. It was the big play nature of Gunnar McElroy because Paradise's defense was pretty much all over the secondary all night. McElroy only went 9 for 25 for 216 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. And we've talked about this kid's name on the District 4 3A report. And finally, we kind of see a little bit of a different side. And Peaster had to tap into something we hadn't quite seen with Tremar Gilbert. 33 carries. We kind of talked about how he's intermittently used at times. That, you only see him having 8 to 10 carries in a game. Kind of a special player as far as that goes, where it's limited touches. And we kind of talk about that with Ish Harris as well, is that you don't see that workhorse kind of attitude, but they needed Tremar Gilbert to be a workhorse on this night, and he had 33 carries for 189 yards and 5 touchdowns. Clearly the MVP, and that really kind of reminds me of the Dallas Cowboys, because with the Cowboys you have to kind of pick your poison, right? They can run the ball, they can throw the ball, and Gunnar McElroy just the previous week had put up over 400 yards and all kinds of, Rhett Steen was the player of the week for DFW varsity, and he still was a big play threat. He had 3 receptions for 139 yards, no TDs, but he did extend the field. It allowed for Tremar Gilbert to do what he needed to do. They scored the touchdown in the second overtime, took care of business. Ponder and Pilot Point, another blowout, 65-14. And we talk about Rhett Steen having a big day a couple weeks ago. And again, what can you say about Aiden Cox? I mean, this kid is putting up big numbers, long play threats every single week. 6 receptions, 243 yards, 74 yards for the longest touchdown reception, 3 touchdowns. I mean, just a complete athlete doing great things for Pilot Point. Ish Harris was a little more of what we're talking about with Tremar Gilbert being a player that you just use intermittently as a big play threat. 5 carries, 98 yards, and 3 touchdowns. So 60% of his carries went for touchdowns, and he had 2 receptions for 52 yards, and one of those went for a 45-yard touchdown. So touched the ball 7 times, got in the end zone 4 times. Talk about a threat. And obviously with this game the way it was, you saw Dakota David get in, the senior for Pilot Point, get a good second half in there and get a chance to play some, because Wyatt Smith had such a great first half and with the 9 of 14, 287 yards and 3 touchdowns. We talk about Pilot Point's offense. The defense really was the name of the game, because what Ponder wants to do is, they want to pound it. And they carried it 49 times for only 135 yards. Clifton Cooper only had 16 carries for only 13 yards, so less than a yard of play. He threw for 178 yards and 2 touchdowns as well. Case Peacock, the sophomore, and we keep talking about these sophomores, and we even talk about Gage Anderson, the freshman. There's going to be some talent for years to come in this district, even with some pretty good graduation experiences. And then we had Boyd and Brock. Anytime we talk about Boyd, we talk about Rendon Lamont. And Brock did a really good job of keeping him at bay. Only threw for 93 yards on 12 completions and ran for 106 yards on 32 carries. Boyd had 63 plays and only 196 yards. The Eagles defense completely shut down Boyd. And obviously with Brock offensively, they got out to, it was 48-0 at the end of the third quarter. And then you just kind of saw them go through the paces to end up the game. 55-6, And Tyler Moody, 12 for 17, 202 yards and 4 touchdowns. Cutter Wilson only had to touch the ball 12 times, but had 141 yards. And the leading receiver for Brock, Zach Brewster, 4 receptions and 74 yards on the day. With Brock, you always want to wonder about Nathan Jones and how he did. And again, just really wasn't needed. He caught 2 balls, but both of them went for touchdowns. So that big play, jump ball threat in the end zone. And we kind of talked about that with Tramar Gilbert, that, with, is he there when you need him? And for Nathan Jones, they haven't needed him quite yet, and I don't even think they're going to need him until the playoffs. But he is going to be a threat in the playoffs, and can they slow them down? Can Jim Ned scheme around things to slow Nathan Jones down, and can he be a factor? And I guess we will find out in the third round of the playoffs. So that leads us to this week, where we have some pretty good games. We've got Brock versus Peaster. We've got Pilot Point versus Boyd. We've got Whitesboro versus Paradise, and Ponder versus Bowie. And I mentioned the playoff scenarios where I don't think Peaster has quite clinched the playoffs, because this week we have Whitesboro and Paradise. So let's say hypothetically Paradise beats Whitesboro and Brock beats Peaster. One of those games a little less hypothetical than the other one. And then we have Whitesboro beating Peaster next week, and Paradise winning winning their game next week. We have a 3-way tie at 4-3 for that last playoff spot, and then it's going to come down to point margin. And right now, the only game we have between these 3 teams is the Peaster Paradise game, where Peaster is +3. So if either of the 2 games that we still have left in these 3 teams playing each other, we have Whitesboro and Peaster and Whitesboro and Paradise, is more than a 3-point margin, then you could definitely see things flip, because we're going to have 3 teams tied for 2 playoff spots. And I don't have the playoff tiebreakers in front of me. We talk about this on Twitter all the time. The playoff tiebreakers are a headache, because sometimes once you go to points, you stay to points. Sometimes you break a tie and then go head-to-head after you break the first tie. So it'll be interesting to find out. But in my eyes, Peaster has not clinched that last playoff spot. And in fact, unless they win against Whitesboro, or Whitesboro beats Paradise, that's very much in doubt at this point. Now, I do think that Whitesboro will beat Paradise, and I think Whitesboro will beat Peaster next week. And in fact, I might go to that Whitesboro-Peaster game. You might have the District 4-3A report live next week out in the wild. So we'll see how that plays out with my true love of Plano East, and if they can make the playoffs or not, or have a chance to make the playoffs. They play on Thursday next week against Flower Mound Marcus Senior Night. Come out to Kimbrough if you're so inclined, District 4 3A fans. But this week I'm going to take Brock over Peaster, and I think, we have an 8-0 versus 7-1, and it sure seems like that'll be a, game of the week, 8-0 versus 7-1. I think Brock is 4 to 5 touchdowns better than Peaster. Peaster is a fun story this year. They're part of that good middle of the pack that we keep talking about, as far as potentially getting a playoff run, and you gotta avoid Jim Ned, and we'll talk about the significance of that next week. But I think Brock is just on a completely other level. Pilot Point versus Boyd. I think Pilot Point is going to be a big favorite. I think the only question will be who wins by more. Will Brock beat Peaster by more, or Pilot Point beating Boyd by more? I think Pilot Point will have a healthier point spread. Whitesboro versus Paradise. We've seen Paradise be very competitive and play in the middle of the pack, play very tough. I think this is going to be a one-score game. I think Whitesboro is going to win, but I think it'll be a one-score game. And then Ponder versus Bowie. I'm going to take Ponder to get their first district win. Could be their last district win, because I think Boyd has a better chance to get that 6th playoff spot. And that actually kind of sets us up to 2 weeks from now. And back in the day, and a little personal insight into me, I used to love bowling. I used to love league bowling. And we would have these championship weeks. And the championship weeks, you would have, they would just take the seedings. 1 would play 2, 3 would play 4, 5 would play 6, 7 would play 8. And you would play that, you're guaranteed that game with a team above or a team below you. And things are setting up next week for week 11 to be very much like that. Brock and Pilot Point, you got 1 and 2. Depending on how things go this week, Whitesboro and Feaster, 3 versus 4. And it's going to be fun football for seeding purposes. And I think things will be pretty much determined in 3A when we get to that point. But some very fun football games. And that Feaster Whitesboro, I know coaches don't like to talk about this as far as it relates to avoiding a certain team. But the difference between playing the first place team in District 3 and the second place team, which in my opinion right now will end up being Wall, is about 20 points worth of point spread. And in this case, the difference between potentially winning the game and losing the game, I think you're going to be a solid underdog against Jim Ned, that fourth place team. But the third place team, I think the third place team against the second place team in District 3A, they will be an underdog, but it'll be a one-score game kind of an underdog, whereas Jim Ned will be very much like playing Brock in this district. And speaking of that, things are starting to shape up in District 3A. Jim Ned, as you recall, that I have a little competition between Jim Ned and Brock every week to kind of see who I'm going to give the favorite, the nod to in the playoffs. Currently, it was 4-4 going into this week. And this week, this past week, Jim Ned played San Angelo TLCA. So if everybody has got that song in their head, you're down at the TLCA. Poor TLCA. They've not been a good season for them. I'm sure it's a leadership academy kind of a thing. But they are 0-8 this year after Jim Ned beat them by 70. I picked Jim Ned to win that game by 70, and Jim Ned wins by 70. I picked Brock to win by 49. Brock wins by 48. I told you that 1 point would be a big difference, and that is why I give Jim Ned the win for this week. Jim Ned is now 5-4 in my game against Brock to see who I think will who I will pick going into the playoffs in that third round. So with one more win, Jim Ned can clinch, and Jim Ned has a very similar game to what Feaster has. Kind of the up-and-coming team in District 3A is Breckenridge, and one could argue the up-and-coming team in District 4 3A is Feaster. So Jim Ned and Breckenridge, Brock and Feaster, who will have the bigger point margin? We will find out this week. We'll just do it straight up. Whoever has the better point margin will get the win. And if Jim Ned gets the higher point margin, they will clinch their victory, and I will pick them to beat Brock in the third round of the playoffs. Bushland is continuing to progress on a high note. Right now, in considering Bushland versus Pilot Point, Bushland might be a couple point favorite, so that's important to consider as well. Shallow Water, I think I would pick Pilot Point over Shallow Water right now. But Whitesboro, obviously Whitesboro and Pilot Point, they went to overtime. You had Feaster and Paradise, they went to overtime. I think Whitesboro is a little bit better than people are giving them credit for, especially our guest last week, Nolan Ruth, who picked them to not even make the playoffs, is picking them to lose to Paradise and Feaster the next 2 weeks. But we'll find out, because that's why they play the game. Like I said, I'll be taking Whitesboro to beat Paradise, and I think it'll be very much like how Feaster will be ahead pretty much the whole game, but Paradise has certainly shown that they will not give up. So that is the District 4 3A report this week. I appreciate you for tuning in and all of your patronage and giving me feedback on Twitter. This has been a very fun season, a very fun district to cover, and I think the best is yet to come, because we're going to have some playoff runs with these teams and some very good playoff matchups, especially that District 3 versus District 4, because that district's got Wall, Breckenridge, and Early all equivalent to what I would consider Pilot Point, Peaster, and Whitesboro. So some great first round matchups to be sure. Where the only blowouts will really be Brock playing whoever the fourth place team is. I would consider early that team right now, and then Jim Ned versus the fourth place team in District 4 3A, which I think will end up being Peaster as of right now. So next week we'll be previewing things, and who knows? In 2 weeks, when we get to the playoffs, we might have some audio from Peaster and Whitesboro live. And heck, I might drive that 18 miles down and down 377 and check out Pilot Point and Brock pregame as well. So thank you for tuning in, our friends in Pilot Point. Go ahead and get that music going on and play me out. Next week.